Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Dr. Nika White, and it is such a pleasure for me to host this Intentional Conversations virtual community chat week after week, every Friday at this time from 11 to 12 noon. We do have a great hour of really enriching dialogue that I think is going to be not only relevant to what's happening right now in the world, but also I think it's going to be instructional in terms of giving us something that we can walk away with to begin to apply to the relationships and to the interactions that we're having. I have to share that my heart is really, really heavy this week. As such, I'm sure many others are experiencing the same. And so we want to just hold this space for each other to be able to learn with and from each other. So we're going to jump right in. I do encourage each of you to follow me on social media. I can produce a lot of content, and this is a way for us to continue to engage in dialogue around the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Right now, it's critically important for us to lead inclusively. So you can find me on Twitter at Nika White, Facebook, Nika White Consulting, which we're live right now, Instagram at Nika C. White, or on LinkedIn at Dr. Nika White. And I would certainly enjoy being connected to each of you. I also want to let you know that there are a number of complimentary resources that I make available through my website, some of which are monthly blog articles. I do small video snippets to help produce learning around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those are called Inclusion Uncomplicated. It's where we simplify DEI. I have a number of white papers that are available. And so I just encourage you to visit my website at nikawhite.com to be connected to those resources, again, that are complementary to you as you continue to grow as an inclusion-minded leader. I always like to make sure that I provide information on the upcoming week, Intentional Conversations. And we have a phenomenal speaker that's joining me as my co-host next Friday on June 5th. And her name is Kay Fabella. And I have to share that she is joining us from Spain. That's where she is based. And we're going to be talking about how underrepresented leaders can go from invisible to being influencers, and also the significance of storytelling to help shape identities and foster connections and organizational change management strategies. And so I look forward to having Kay as my guest next week. The registration is already open, and I look forward to seeing many of you to be a part of that conversation. I also want to share a summer book club that we're doing. You may recall that a few weeks ago, we had Minda Harts, which is the author of the memo, What Women of Color Need to Know to Secure Their Seat at the Table. And it was very interactive discussions. I think that we probably could have spoken with Minda for another hour or so, but I want to take just a brief moment now to share this brief promo video for those of you who have already not committed to the summer book club. Maybe you will find this worthwhile of your time.
Hello, I am Dr. Nika White, and I am bringing to you today a very special opportunity that I know you're going to want to be a part of. Have you heard of this book, The Memo by Minda Harts? It's all about what women of color need to know to secure the seat. And I'm inviting you to a summer book club that begins in June. There are 3 sessions total. And the best part about it is that we're going to have the author herself, Minda Harts, right there as my co-host, joining the conversations. We're going to be talking about workplace dynamics, how to secure the seat, the importance of allyship. And speaking of which, this is not just for women of color. This is also for men and just women of all types. If you are someone who wants to help provide opportunities for women of color to excel in the workplace, then this is for you. So as a mentor, a coach, a supervisor, or just an ally, we hope that you will join us. You can register by signing up at nikawhite.com, and we look forward to seeing you there. The memo, get it, secure your seat.
Fantastic. So now, intentional conversations, why we're here today. I want to give you a little bit of information that I hope you will partner with me on as we hold this space for each other in a very effective way. These are agreements to make sure that our experience today is as fruitful as possible. So I want you to keep these items in mind. The first is, when not sharing, we ask that you kindly keep your line on mute so that we avoid background noise disruption. And again, as I mentioned before, we'd love to see your smiling face, but cameras are not required at all. We know that that may not be a situation that works for you at this moment in time. And so we're just glad to have you participating in whatever capacity that you're comfortable with. As I mentioned before, while I have an incredible guest co-host that I will introduce properly in just a moment, neither she or I have all the answers, but we are here to certainly learn with and from each other, and also create community. So there are going to be several opportunities where we will open up the line to give any of you who desires the ability to share, present a question, or just contribute to the conversation. Our topics for each of these sessions that happen every week, they intersect diversity, equity, and inclusion with leadership and business. So you're going to see a blend of those three categories. We certainly respect what's top of mind for all of us navigating these uncertain times during this global pandemic. And so certainly there are going to be some information that will come up that's relevant to COVID, but we're not going to spend all of our time talking about COVID. This is more about providing a path to action through application and not just simply transferring information. I think that knowledge is important, but equally important is making sure that we're equipping ourselves with good information and tools so that we can propel ourselves to the next level and to lead inclusively. I want you all to leverage the chat room for sharing resources. Maybe there's some links to articles that relate to some of the topics we're going to share. Include your contact information. LinkedIn is a great way to keep this community connected outside of our convenings every Friday. And it's also a place for you to ask your questions. And we look forward to making sure that that chat transcript is available to all registrants when we send the follow-up email this afternoon. This session is being recorded, and we will certainly make sure that along with the follow-up email that a link to the recording is provided. So those are all of our agreements, and hopefully you all are going to be willingly partnering with me as we ensure our time together is fruitful. So now it gives me such great pleasure to introduce our special guest host, and her name is Liesel Mertes. And I am so honored to have her. I want to give her a formal introduction, and then we'll bring her on live so she can share with us and get involved in today's discussion. So Liesel is the founder of Handle with Care, a workplace empathy expert. And she is an acclaimed workplace empathy expert. Of course, she has experienced her own loss and struggle, but she emerged with a deep understanding of what employees need to feel supported at work after a disruptive life event. As the founder of Handle with Care, Liesel works with groups that want to boost employee satisfaction, as well as attract and retain better talent. Liesel's favorite clients are forward-thinking organizations who know the value in supporting their employees with empathy and compassion. Her expertise is broad: loss, returning to work, a diagnosis, relationship transitions, how empathy impacts the brain, and no disruption is considered less significant. On these topics, Liesel is a dedicated speaker, writer, consultant, and host of the Handle with Care podcast. Liesel earned her bachelor's degree in political science, a master's degree in business administration, and currently is pursuing studies to obtain a master's in divinity. She has worked in Nairobi, consulted in Fiji, and led cohorts in Ghana. Her adventures brought her to Indiana, which is where she's based now, and she's the proud mother, wife, and lover of time spent on the water. Through her actionable strategies, real-life stories, and passionate commitment, Liesel helps people survive, stabilize, and thrive in the aftermath of adversity. And we all know we're in the midst of lots of adversities right now in our society, unfortunately, which is why I mentioned I have such a heavy heart today. But with that in mind, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can bring Liesel on. And I hope that you all will help me welcome my special guest today, Liesel Mertes. How are you, Liesel?
Morning, Nika. On the one hand, I am well. My children spent the night at the grandparents' house last night, so it was like remarkable how few messes were made in my household, and how like the dishwasher was only half full. But also, I echo with you. It is a heavy week for so many reasons. So I'm glad to be having this conversation, and I share with you in some small part in that heaviness.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that I was mentioning early on today as I was preparing the Facebook Live audience to join that, we have this date on the books now for quite some time. And I think when we first started talking about the opportunity to connect today, it was solely focused on COVID, right? And all of the disruptions that are happening to people's lives. And you and I both have since added to this conversation because we realize that what's happening in society in terms of the devaluing of Black and Brown lives is certainly top of mind for all of us. And it's becoming disheartening, it's exhausting, it's hurtful, it's terrifying, as a mom of an 18-year-old son, Black son, and as the wife of a Black husband, it's hard for us to not be impacted by the circumstances that we're seeing frequently occur that are just unjustified and they're painful. And
Yeah.
so I definitely want to make sure that we hold space for this community to talk about those issues as well, because as we dig deep into the topic of empathy and compassion, we know that we need so much of that right now, and not just from those of us who are part of those marginalized communities that are being impacted, but we need everyone to play a role in being a part of the solution and speaking up. And so I just want you to react to that for a second for me, please.
Yeah. You know, in my work writ large with companies and individuals, what I would say is there is right now a seismic shift going on in workplace awareness, that people bring their holistic selves to the office. It's no longer just, this is how I show up from 9 to 5, and then I go home and I encounter all these other things that are my life. It's that as we show up, we bring our whole selves, and that includes, like you said, the things that go on, even apart from COVID, people getting sick, people dying, divorces happening. Then the volume has been turned up, internationally right now, as the prevalence of people losing jobs or people having disruptive diagnoses. So already, there's an elevated sense of tension and disruption. And then this last week, and even to say this last week, I know is not representative of the reality, because this last week is really just headlines that are capturing what is happening all of the time. And we're over breakfast. I was just talking about the heaviness, and I was like, and I actually have the privilege of feeling this, and in some ways, like, going on with my day, like it feels like discreet a little bit. I was like, for so many people, for so many Black and brown people, they are living this, and it is inescapable because it connects with like 100 different other things that have happened to them even over the last week. So one of the key tenets that I teach is, you don't know what you don't know. And that's why active listening is so important. So as much as I come to this as someone who teaches in the space of empathy and teaches tactics and things like that, I also come in the posture of deep listening right now to say, I cannot imagine the years of hurt and injustice and the generational aspect that these headlines tap into. So I'm so sorry. I feel it in a heavy way, and I know I only feel like fractionally what so many people on this call must bring to these topics.
Well, you're very much appreciated for your position of standing in solidarity. I have followed your work for quite some time, and in fact, you're going to be one of our closing keynote speaker, in fact, for the October Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Summit that happens in Greenville every year through the Greenville Chamber. And so you and I connected about a year ago as I was starting to follow your work, and it was really connected to your focus on empathy and compassion. And we're seeing that those qualifications, those attributes are even more important right now for leaders all over for a variety of reasons. And so, but I want us to not only talk about it from a workplace perspective, but just as a societal perspective. And so let's take a step back right now. And I want you to share your story, your why. I always like to ask that question because you have a story that's led you to not only become an expert in this space, but you have experienced a lot of loss and challenging situations that I think makes you extremely poised to be able to talk about this broader context of the need for holding space for each other and allyship and support and compassion and empathy.
Thank you for that invitation. And I saw even next week's speaker talking about the importance of storytelling, because we are always, our stories that we bring to the table. That's what makes any relationship interesting and engaging, or the incredibly dry talks that we sometimes have to sit through to say, oh yeah, there's a story behind that. So my story that brought me to this work had to do with, it was in 2011. I had just said yes to an MBA program, and I found out 2 weeks later that I was unexpectedly pregnant with our third child. It was a little girl named Mercy. And I found out at our 20-week scan that she had a pretty profound birth defect. The base of her skull had not closed entirely, so she had this large fluid-filled sac. And what that meant was there was this wide range of outcomes. The doctor said, we won't actually know whether this is something that is terminal or potentially operable until she's born, until we can get an outside the womb MRI. So that was this, the next 20 weeks were this incredibly heavy time of waiting and hoping and meeting with different, professionals. It turned out her birthday is February 15th. She was born, and it was really clear that any surgical intervention would be doing things to her and not for her. She could not breathe on her own. So she lived with us for 8 days before she died. And if you are a parent who has experienced that loss, or anyone who has, it is searing. It is horrible to bury your child on so many different levels. As it specifically relates to this work, it also gave me an opportunity to, as much as I was living in real time, also be experiencing, there were some people that their support and how they came, alongside me, the different people in my cohort, or the support of the graduate school, that was so meaningful, so essential to being able to, not just like snap out of it because there's this process that you have to go through, but to feel like maybe I won't be devastated ever. And then there were people who I'm sure they did not even know how clueless they were. Fast forward a couple of years, my youngest is a little guy named Moses. He's 5, right now, almost 6. But he was another child. He had to have, he's missing one of his valves in his heart, which, if you don't know about the heart, you need all 4 of them. He's had to have a number of open heart surgeries. And that is another, he's doing super well. His biggest problem right now is that he's reverted to bedwetting again in the night. But as far as his heart goes, he's doing great. But that was another opportunity to see how people come alongside or don't. And then a couple of years ago, began to start talking to HR professionals and managers. And I realized that how we care for people, if you work in an organization of any size, you have people who go through disruptive life events. You can't plan on when they happen, but guaranteed they're going to happen. And we do not teach how to respond in our management training programs. We don't measure how well we do it. And it is the next major area of HR development and our human resources support. And I feel that even more strongly as COVID-19 for the indefinite future is going to be putting managers and coworkers in the position of, how do I come alongside somebody who has just had a parent hospitalized? What do I say when they tell me their partner has lost their job? So that's some of the background of what brings me to this work.
No, I love the fact that you were willing to share your personal story with us. I do believe that oftentimes we're connected to our work because of some personal circumstances. Mm-hmm. I always say that as a DEI practitioner, this work is just as much social justice work for me as it is a business imperative. And I'm believing that even more so now, And so I love those connection points. So talk to us a little bit about what your approach is to helping people to gain this deeper level of empathy and compassion. Because sometimes environments do not have a culture where psychological safety is valued, which means that some people aren't even willing to be forthcoming about their personal situations.
Right.
So talk a little bit about how you approach this work.
Yeah, it's a great point. As I, even you said, as you were introducing me, I work best with forward-thinking companies that have already built this value of bringing your whole self to the office and being able to show up in safety. Those are the places that they say we're already laying the foundation, and we need an enhanced skill set. Specifically as it comes to this, we want to keep learning. There are clients or companies that approach me that I purposefully choose not to work with because they have dismissive cultures or toxic cultures that are prioritizing just productivity as the highest goal. And if they engage me and they say, well, great, come, fix our engagement programs by teaching us about empathy, it sets me up to fail because their problems are way deeper than any training or tool can address, in a short amount of time. So absolutely, this is how I engage with healthy cultures, is to be able to come in and empathy is so often seen as a fixed entity, like you have it or you don't. Some personalities are empathetic, other people get a pass because they're just not. Instead of seeing it as, if you value this, like if you actually believe that it matters to your culture and your people, you will invest in growing in your capacity. And I firmly believe that you can teach people and equip them, not to like immediately get it perfect all the time, but in growing in it. And one part of doing that is to examine our toolkit that we have, like because of your community of origin, because of your personality type, because of what people in your life have said to you during hard times. Like as we do facilitations and we do role playing, people find themselves and they're saying the same thing that, some uncle told them when they were 8 years old, and, you just need to buck up or like just push on through, and to examine like people have their current toolkit. And what I really want to involve people in is to say, what does a better toolkit look like to get you where you want to go?
Yeah. So what's indicative of an organization that has already embraced this philosophy to where when they approach you, you say, yes, I want to work with this company? What signs do you look for?
Well, a great, kind of a quick and dirty assessment, because as you know, in your training space, like there are so many nuances, there are types of things, but just in a quick assessment, an embrace of this from members of the executive team is really important. So many times HR initiatives are driven by the HR person, which depending on an organization, they don't always have a seat at the table as to decision making. But a lot of people who rise to leadership and executive positions in companies, what has been rewarded that has allowed them to increase profit margins and lead has not necessarily been empathy or like really caring for people along the way. So if you have a leadership team that says, we're all in on this, like we're going to, I'll give you an example. I did a facilitation within the last couple of weeks with a company that is, in all of their promotional materials, in the presence that they display on their website, it's very much, we care for our people, we want to be present. And it was noteworthy, like their executive leadership team, like they weren't even on the call, they had engaged me and they were paying me, but for whatever was going on, like it didn't matter enough that they were even present. And
right.
And I, in all kinds of the ways through the debriefing, I was like, that's representative of a much deeper issue.
Right. And that's always a clear-cut sign, and I like to call it, this is more about satisfying compliance intent than, the intent to really see this as something that you want to impact the entire system, the culture, the policy, the procedures,
Yeah.
And so like you, I tend to have a radar for those things as well. And I'm fortunate to be at a place in my business where I can be selective about what I say yes and no to. And I'm really after impact. And so, I can appreciate that line of thinking. So let's talk a little bit about what leaders should be doing right now and saying, specifically as it relates to, and I want to say their names because, again, I know to your point, we're only talking about recent situations and there's a whole line. I mean, we could probably sit here the whole rest of our time and call out all the names that have unjustly left this world. But I want to call out the names of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. So knowing that so many organizations have diverse workforce and they have, Black and brown people, what should those leaders be saying or doing as acknowledgement of what's going on? Because I'm a firm believer that if we believe that these big social complex issues that are happening outside of the workplace are not impacting people, we are grossly misguided. And so I believe that we have to acknowledge it. So what should these leaders be doing and saying?
Well, don't see me as sidestepping the question, but I'm going to tee it up and then I want to pass it back to you because first off, I would say to leaders, you have to be willing to press into areas that feel uncomfortable. I think especially for majority male, white men, this can feel politically freighted. It can feel like if I use my platforms, like how am I going to be associated with, there can be this sense of, let me just say, I'm active on LinkedIn. I have been, and people can say like, oh, there's different platforms for that, but like, it makes me angry. It makes me angry that this week we're still talking about like how to bounce back from, a recession or how to maximize your productivity. It's like, there's so much noise in the atmosphere and it feels like some of the most important things and it's not even if you have Black or brown people on your staff. I mean, there is a specific care. It's because you're human and you're caring, and the silence is deafening. It is deafening. And when people are talking about, even in empathy, people are saying like, people are going to remember how you cared for your people and how you made decisions during COVID-19 or not. And I think leaders need to feel that import. Like, this is a litmus test of your leadership. You cannot just exist in silence. Where I want to pass it back to you is to say, I can speak to my perception. I have read and tried to just continue absorbing like what it means to be an ally, but I actually think that the people who can speak, the voices we need to most tune ourselves to and what they're saying that they need are people of color. They're people like that are on this call. What do you think is important? What are the aspects of leadership that are connecting on a felt level with you right now? So I turn it back over.
Well, I love that you punted it back, and I appreciate your response to that. I can tell the level of thoughtfulness and the level of care that you have around these topics. And again, it's not just because of this one conversation, but for our full audience. It's because you and I have been in the relationship now for about a year, following each other, supporting each other's work. And to your point, silence is very deafening. Silence is also a message. And I don't think that leaders sometimes consider that. They feel as though, well, if I just ignore it, don't say anything about it, then it doesn't give me room for someone to perceive me as, one way or the other. I'm just kind of neutral. But to me, it definitely is a message. And so as a person of color who's really deeply disturbed, angry, and hurt by all that's going on, the acknowledgement of it for me has been helpful. But I sat in on a meeting yesterday, and this is full transparency, and it was business as usual. And we were doing some round robins, and we got to the end, and I got emotional. And what I was sharing with my teammates that were part of this call was that, are we not going to acknowledge this? For us to not take a leadership approach to at least have the conversation, it was just disappointing. And so, but you know what? I didn't stay there for a long period of time. And what I'm talking about is with that disappointment. And the reason why is because I said, you know what? I think that's part of the problem, is that we're always waiting for someone else to be the change, and we only can control ourselves. And so in that moment, I just decided I'm going to step up, and I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to introduce this conversation. I'm going to force others to be a part of this dialogue. And, I was met with a lot of great support, a lot of great compassion and empathy. And even though I had to initiate it, again, I could have stayed right there and been disappointed about that, just missed the whole opportunity, but it led to really fruitful dialogue. And I recognize that there's a huge population of people that are part of marginalized communities that believe you are continuing to oppress me by making me help you to understand why I'm oppressed or why these situations are so hurtful. And I agree, not everybody has that mental space to be able to handle those conversations in a way that could be productive or fruitful. But for those of us who can, we have to continue to keep speaking up at all costs. And I will say this too, I have been very encouraged by the number of people in my network, and I have a pretty broad network. I mean, these are white men, these are white women who have just on their own called, text, reach out to say, how are you doing? And honestly, I knew that for many of them, they didn't know exactly what to say, but it was just the act of being bold enough and leaning into their vulnerabilities to say, I'm going to reach out nonetheless, because I at least want you to know that I stand with you. And I also have appreciated people's thoughtfulness to ask, what can I do right now? I literally probably have 3 or 4 calls that are set up with people that have reached out just to say, I just want to dialogue, Nika. I want to understand as a white woman, as a white man, what can I do? What am I missing? What do I don't know? What's appropriate and what's not? And I think that it's important for us to acknowledge that and to try to provide the tools and the knowledge and resources to help those individuals who really want to stand in solidarity to do it in a way that's effective.
It's so good. This is the sort of question that I often ask guests on my podcast. So it's so important to talk about what is meaningful. On the flip side, what would you say are like, for someone who's listening and thinking, I don't know how to respond, I don't know what to say, I'm scared of doing it wrong. What would you say? You know what? These are bad ways of responding. Like, just never do this. Like, these are the landmines. Let me just put it out there for you to avoid, whether in interpersonal, conversations or from a leadership perspective.
So things like, I know how you feel when you can't possibly know how I feel. Yeah. Things like, well, at least they have arrested them. That doesn't help either. Yeah. And I think the biggest one for me is just, again, as I mentioned before, through the storytelling and the narrative that I just shared, was just completely ignoring it. Like it didn't happen. And I'll tell you something else that I think that a lot of leaders, particularly a lot of white male leaders, and I'm not picking on white men because some of my best advocates are white men. And I love the fact that we have so many that are finding it appropriate to be even more vocal, because, their presentation of a perspective lands on people differently than a person of color oftentimes. But what I have appreciated is recognizing that I'm in this space, this is my lane, but because I am part of an organization that has a lot of influence, right? And a lot of brand capital, and that reputation really holds space to be able to bring forth a voice that others may not want to hear, but they are willing to, and I'm using this word loosely, compromise the potential downfall of it by saying, this is my space, this is my lane, but I can't separate the two as a leader. Because being a leader as a brand and as an individual, you can't just operate in a very one lane area. You have to be willing to cross-pollinate those things, because again, you're talking about people, and people are part of these organizations, and they are impacted by what's happening outside of the 4 walls of that organization. And so those are some of the things that come to mind immediately. I would love to hear what others have to say, so please put those in the chat and we'll make sure we come back to that later. But I want to stay on this topic because I do believe that there's some people who are well-intended and they want to find the right thing to do. I think that one of the other to-dos, not don't do's, but to-dos, is to ask the question. I appreciate when people say, I really have no words, Nika, but I just want you to know that I'm standing with you and I'm hurting with you, and this is not right. Sometimes just simply the acknowledgement of this is not right. And I will tell you something else. It's one thing to share that one-on-one with your Black or brown friend, but you need to have that voice to be heard and stated with such level of conviction when you're around your larger audience of white colleagues as well.
Absolutely. One of the things I do in my trainings is I introduce people to various avatars, like types of responses, because people can see themselves in that. And even in the really good points that you made, I hear some of those characters coming out. What I say to people is one of the first people that you need to meet as you develop your new toolkit is Silent Sam. And whether Silent Sam is talking about, the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis or somebody's miscarriage, Silent Sam feels so inherently uncomfortable and doesn't know, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I'm just not going to do anything. And like that, as I hear again and again with clients and companies, that is one of the worst things, as people say, like, my culture completely missed me, like my company didn't even care. That silence can be so deafening. There's commiserating Candace, who wants to hijack the narrative, like, oh, I hear you. And this connects to the one time when I was traveling abroad and, I felt like so isolated. So like, and suddenly it becomes, about your story.
Yes.
Yeah, it's hijacking someone else's story. And it really gets back to that foundational aspect of active listening. Like, to care for someone means that you want to actively immerse yourself in thinking, like, what is actually being said. And then the cheer up Cheryl is another one where it's like, well, let's talk about the bright side, of this.
Yes.
That at least they have been dismissed from the police force.
Yes.
At least,
Yes.
to me, at least you have other children after the death of your daughter.
Right.
And it's like anything, just again, like quick and dirty, anything that begins with at least is going to marginalize the story. Like, it's going to show that you're not feeling the weight of it. And the person either is going to decide, like, you're not a trustworthy person to listen to, like, to listen to me, or they're going to have to join in that marginalization of their own pain and say, well, okay, I mean, yeah, I guess they've been dismissed. Fix it Frankie is another one, person who just wants to fix it. Like, what's the solution? Can we talk about tactics? What's the next thing? And sometimes those things are important. There are phone calls to be made. There are representatives to be contacted. But again, I mean, even on the personal level, like, I say to people, if you've had and you tell your partner about it, the dog puked on the floor, and I had a Zoom call that went really badly, and the dishwasher broke, and their first response is, well, why did you like feed the dog table scraps? That makes them puke on the floor. Like, that sort of fixing mentality. You just think, like, you have not heard me. You've not heard anything I said. Like, I don't want your solutions. So yeah, you connect with all of those things of like, these are things that we do so unconsciously, and we don't know why people shut down, or we don't know why they don't feel cared for. And it's like, because you're doing the thing that takes away from actually, and that's where, another thing I teach is so many people feel foundationally, because we are a culture of quick fixes and we want people to be happy, especially people from a majority culture who oftentimes can fix things and they don't have to be uncomfortable. We want to do that in our responses. And, that oftentimes short circuits just the resonance of being like, this sounds horrible. I will just sit with you in it. It sounds horrible. And let me just acknowledge that. So
exactly. Yeah, I love that. So you're getting a lot of great comments into the chat room, particularly people are really loving the avatars, and there's even been a request. We have to be aware of all of the avatar characters. And so maybe at some point you can share those with us. Because I think that probably all of us can identify with, somebody that fits all those categories.
Or if we're honest, we've been those people. Like,
oh, absolutely.
I'm commiserating Candace. I've got my own sad story and I like to talk.
Yeah.
I'm still aware of that, of like,
I have
like, you actively have to.
And it happens all the time, because it's subtle. And I think that what's so dangerous about it, it's almost like implicit bias. We don't know that it's happening, right? But it's just as dangerous. You shared the situation of child rearing. I remember before we were able to successfully have 2 kids, my first pregnancy was a miscarriage, and I was devastated. And I didn't realize it was really frequent for women to miscarry in the early stages. And so I thought, what's wrong with me? Can I have kids? Can I not have kids? And people around me would say stuff like, oh, you're young.
Yeah.
You'll bounce back.
Right.
And that was hard. And I felt like I don't really know how to even help people to approach me in a more appropriate way, because I'm not sure. Maybe this is natural. Maybe this is what normal people go through, and I'm being insensitive. I'm being too sensitive rather. So, well, that's important.
It's bless their hearts.
Mm-hmm.
People are trying. they're
Yeah.
trying, they're actually wanting to show up. And that gets down to like, you have the toolkit you have. If people have told you that stuff your whole life, like some people, my husband is from northern Minnesota. They are Swedish. It is cold. They are not emotional people. And like you just weather a lot. You have like a stiff upper lip. You are not highly emotional. And it's like that sort of cultural conditioning of like, well, you don't make a big deal of this kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Can in its own way lead to a lot of suppressing your own emotions. And when you see unruly emotions in other people, like what that can make you want to do is just tell them like it's not a big deal. Like I have lovely sister-in-laws who are very nice in tons of ways, but there was a moment where I remember a couple of years ago, we're up there and my young daughter, she's getting really overwhelmed at having to leave because she loves being up there with her grandparents. And she's like, I'm so sad. I'm so sad. Like, I don't know if I'm ever coming back. And a sister-in-law and I are both in the room. And we say at the same time, my sister-in-law says, you're not sad, right? As I am saying, it is sad, Ada, it is sad. And it was that juxtaposition of the sense of like, well, you're not really that sad. Like, it's going to be okay. This isn't a big deal. Let's just bring the level down.
Mhm.
Instead of that acknowledgement, like for a 4-year-old, this is super horrible. And like, I see that you're sad and I'm going to be with you in that. And it can seem like a small thing, but we are doing our empathetic cultural conditioning all the time in big ways and small. And you get back to like company cultures or things like that, like that's a particular manager that influences a whole department in like how you communicate. Are we just pushing through to the next deadline or things like that? And companies are having to face these realities as people are like, we are incredibly disrupted right now. And if you're just pushing through your second quarter goals and acting like it's not a thing, like you're losing people. And that's an important lesson because it's a reflection of a true reality. Like people are more than the numbers that they produce. And
Yeah, I think about your 4-year-old story, and what it reminds me of is that your 4-year-old, like many of us on many occasions, what we're saying is that we want you to believe us. We want you to believe our feelings. We want you to validate our feelings. And I think that's part of this level of empathy and compassion. We have to be able to listen intently, actively listen. We have to be willing to understand that my lived experiences may not ever allow me to fully understand this other person's lived experiences, but we need to make darn sure that when that person walk away from this conversation, they feel supported, they feel validated.
yeah,
And I think that's missing sometimes, because if we can't see ourselves feeling that way or perceiving an experience in such a way, then we deem it to not be important. And I will tell you that I know that a lot of people of color often struggle with having their lived experiences to be believed.
yes.
And so, yeah, that's really critical. So I
Well,
want to shift, go ahead. And then I'll say this, and then we're going to shift. I want you to get your point out, but then I want to also remind the audience that we're going to shift and we're going to take questions from each of you. So if you have questions, get them prepared right now. So go ahead, Liesel, you wanted to share something.
well, this is another 1 hour conversation, but I'm struck that also, it's so much, we talk about children, there's a gendered aspect in this, in
Right.
like the range of emotions that we make available. What do we allow our little boys to feel? And how does that frame them? And how does that affect male leadership? And like, even looking at what's going on now, like anger is, this high, like there's so much more to like sadness underneath and all those things. And like, we need to, in company cultures and informative experiences, give people a much broader conception of what are allowable emotions. Because I'm struck, like little boys, really, they're allowed to be happy, angry, occasionally sad. And like, we see that in the men that develop out of that. Women too, but especially in male culture.
Yeah, for certain. Okay, so I want to allow any member of our audience to unmute themselves if you would like to share a comment or contribute to the conversations, or perhaps just a question. Now is the time to do so. So I'll give you a moment to find that unmute button.
Hello. Hi, Nika.
Angel. Hi.
How are you?
Doing well. Thank you for joining us, Angel.
Absolutely. And I do have a question for Dr. Mertes. I'm wondering, and maybe this can be answered from anybody that's on the line. Um, I am navigating through a myriad of emotions, from the anxiety of COVID. I have depression and anxiety, but it's managed. It was managed up until this happened, and I had a full-blown panic attack in a grocery store because so many people weren't wearing masks, and I've kind of been in isolation, and I'm thankful that there are groups like this. Otherwise, I think I'd probably lose my mind completely, from um, public action events, social action events that I'm able to sit in on just to escape the four walls of my home. And then this week happened in the midst of me losing my job as a result of COVID as well. And so I'm dealing with that emotionally. But now I have two Black men that I love dearly, my husband and my son, that people hate them, but for different reasons. Um, my husband has received even a death threat. Um, and my Black son lives in Georgia. And I'm navigating through the myriad of emotions because my husband is a police officer. So there are people that hate him, but he's also Black. And then when he takes his uniform off, there are other non-Black people that hate him. And then my son, being a Black educated person, just graduating from college and seemingly a threat, I'm feel like I'm pulled from the quote unquote blue family and the quote unquote Black family, because there are good police officers out there. So how would you how would you help someone in my shoes to deal with the emotions? And I worked for a very emotionless company that basically, I lost my job in the middle of a pandemic because they felt like I wasn't keeping up. So how do I deal with that without absolutely losing it?
Liesel, do you want to start? To me, this seems like it's all packaged in the importance of self-care. Do you want to speak to self-care?
I think that you are much better poised to answer the question.
Yeah, so fortunately, Angel and I have a connection. So we've been talking a good bit. So I just first want to start by acknowledging your challenges, acknowledging how you're feeling right now. And, I stand with you. I hope you know that. We've been connected and talking.
Thank you.
But right now, you really need to focus on self-care. And so it's going to be hard to identify what self-care looks like unless you are taking some time to reflect on what calms you, what helps your anxiety to diminish, what gives you joy, and then to focus on those things, because I think it's going to be hard for you to get to a place where you can be fully productive in your new job search and caring for your family in a way if you don't take care of Angel. And so what have you found historically to be some of those things that just really helps put you at peace and at joy? What are some of those things, Angel?
Of course, prayer.
Yeah.
And I was there. I was in the happy place, if you call, because God has blessed me with a provider, and my spouse. And I was there. My heart broke for Breonna Taylor. My heart broke. I was in that space. And so meditation, I'm still very nervous about going to spas and what have you. But Tuesday was really, really difficult. It was really difficult. So of course I pray and meditate, and I spend time with my sorority sisters and people like Nika, but it's hard for me to not hear the silence.
Right.
And it's so loud. And
Yeah.
I have really good non-Black and non-brown friends that I love dearly, that have fit into some of that category this week. But the majority of my non-Black and non-brown friends have been silent.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so loud to the point where I almost am rethinking my relationships with them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because they all know not just my situation. I am one of thousands, millions even, across the world that's in this situation. And I thank God that unemployment is more than most of the jobs I've been applying for. So I feel like God is making me wait, that there's purpose in my wait. And I believe that I have not been employed because he has not opened the door that he wants me to step in yet. So I have peace in that.
Yeah.
But I think what you all have hit on today is defining, because the silence is more hurtful than those characters that you described.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that sometimes because we are human, we have expectations of others. And when they don't meet those expectations, it certainly exasperates, our challenges. But that's why I always say we have to focus on what we can control. I go back to the story of, me being in a conversation with teammates, and finally I became emotional because no one was acknowledging it. But I could control that. I couldn't control them, but I could control me. And I think that you finding people that are in your tribe that can help support you, that you can be vulnerable with, is going to be necessary. I saw a note in the chat that says, maybe think about taking walks in nature, meditating, journal writing. And I am glad that you have found a sense of community with our intentional conversations group. I know that you've been on a couple of them. So yeah, a lot of folks have put their contact information into the chat room. I have a really close friend that just lost her mother last week. And part of my support to her was literally just to call every so often. And even if we had nothing to talk about, she just needed to feel the presence of somebody who knew that she was hurting, that was close by. And so, sometimes it takes us being vulnerable and willing to kind of share. And so I just want to commend you and share that I appreciate your vulnerability and transparency in this conversation with this community. So
thank you.
Nika, could I add one thing?
Absolutely, you can.
Angel, I think that also sometimes, I think it's important to note that you're grieving, and that so many people are grieving, and to put that word to it can sometimes extend the permission of grief is a loss of, we grieve when we have unrealized expectations, whether that is expectation that someone's life will endure, or that people will show up for us, or that things will be different. And to be able to extend that to people, to say you are in grief, allows for some of those ups and downs and the back and forth. And for me also, you talked about prayers being an important point, to realize so much of the Psalms are Psalms of lament, a third of them
Yes.
incredibly honest, why is it persistently like this? And to believe that those, not just from a perspective of faith, but that those deeply questioning aspects of grief and this is not as it should be, and I hate this, needs to have space to breathe, and to believe that even from a context of faith, God powerfully meets people in those places, that is honored, and that's why it's written down for us to be able to have a context for that as well, for that grief.
No, that is awesome. Thank you so much for adding that additional commentary, Liesel. That's phenomenal. We'll take maybe one or two more questions. Would someone else like to unmute yourself and ask a question, or maybe add to the conversation?
Hey, Angel.
Go ahead.
Did I get in, or did somebody get in?
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
We don't have a lot of time, but I definitely wanted to thank Angel for being so open and sharing that, because it is hard to be vulnerable with people. And so I wanted to thank her for her comments. And I also wanted to pull something out of that I thought was so relevant to what we're talking about. And when she said that she's having to reevaluate some of her relationships, and I think that that is really what's crucial for us in the African American and people of color community, is we've got to reevaluate some of our relationships, because those relationships may have been great on the surface, but we're in a day and time now where we really have to ask people to pull up. We have to ask them to speak up and to stand up. And if you are really my friend, Jane Elliott says it best when she talks. And she says, if you are okay being treated the way certain people in this country are being treated, and you don't stand up for them, then you're part of the problem. Mm-hmm. And there are ways that you can do that. I'm not saying that you've got to go out and storm the Capitol or do that, although they can do that without any issue. I'm not saying that, but there are other things that you can do. And I have been active in searching for ways that I can share that with my friends. And there are some that I've lost along the way, and it's okay. But I do think that we've got to start asking people to truly be our friends, not just the lip service of friendship, but to truly be our friend. If we say we have a friend in Jesus and we know what that means, we've got to ask other people to start doing the same.
That's good, Angela. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, maybe one last question. So would someone else like to come on? Yes.
Lucila had a question or a comment.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you.
Did I just mute myself?
You're good. We can hear you.
Good. Okay. I'm in the school system. There's so many things that I know as we come back with our children. There's going to be so many social emotional needs that are going to need to be addressed. There's so many other things, and I know that the leadership in the school is very focused on the academics because of all the impact that e-learning has had and the discrepancies many of our students have been magnified by this e-learning and school closures. So how could I try to get the leadership to buy into investing more time in the social emotional needs of our students and building that empathy from the staff and students for each other, that peer support that I know is going to be so much needed? Are there any specific strategies that I could utilize to do that?
That's a great question. Liesel?
Well, good news about something like empathy, or the importance of addressing those social and emotional needs, is that there's actually brain science that really backs that up. It is not just a case of like, you should care about this. And I should look, Nika, at some resources to send along for people that have further interest, but really like on the level of how your brain processes stress and what actually helps on the neurological level to get us out of this lower brain functioning. Because when you are stressed out and overwhelmed, like the higher levels of your brain, the ones that, you know, allow you to have polite conversation and respond in a timely way to emails, or as a student to like pay attention to diagramming sentences, which was one of my least favorite things because it was hard. But all of those areas like go offline when you are dealing with stress of your home life situation or what has gone on, you know, ahead of time. And to demand that students just be able to hit these metrics without addressing that lower level. So I would say, you know, it always stinks to have to be the one like driving forward change. You would want people in leadership to already have an idea about it. But the good news is when you have that conversation, there are actually very good data points that have already been put forward as to why it matters. And if you frame the conversation of, we will, yes, it is important, you know, students across the nation, but especially in disadvantaged neighborhoods that have not had access to Chromebooks and reliable internet and like closing that achievement gap is very important. But to say, to get us to be able to do that in a way that matters, we first have to address on a physiological level these other issues. And it's not just, touchy-feely, fluffy stuff. It's essential, to link those goals. Like, we can't get to point B without first addressing A is a beginning point.
I love that, Liesel. And what you are amplifying is the need for us to, even though we're emotional creatures, we almost have to lead with conversations like this in a strategic way. And oftentimes that requires bringing data, right? Letting those facts tell the story for us. And so I appreciate the question. The reality, you used the word grief earlier today, and I totally believe that. I think that we all are grieving the loss of so many different things, and it's probably the normal that was normal prior to what it is now. But we also are experiencing trauma, and that seems like a very severe word, but that's exactly what's going on. So imagine being in a traumatized state and trying to continue to produce at a high level. We just aren't at that place. And so I love what someone said in the chat room earlier as Angel was sharing her story. We need to extend ourselves grace. We need that ability to allow ourselves permission to feel what we're feeling and not feel guilty about it. And I want so many leaders of organizations to hear that and understand that. I'm hearing a lot of employers, mandating having your cameras on or mandating certain things, almost as though the expectation is, even though you're working remotely, you still are to be performing at 100% of the time. And that's just not the reality for people right now. We need to really acknowledge that. And so I appreciate the question. I remember I heard just recently that the number of abuse cases have decreased in terms of children. Of course they have, because they've been in their homes. Mm-hmm. And so even thinking about that as a data point, in terms of what was it on average before COVID, now what is it? And, so add that on top of the trauma of COVID, it's a lot. It's a lot for all of us, even those of us who, are perceived to have it all together. We are struggling. I've raised my hand many times, and I think my best friend is catching on the call, Luana Dindi, and I've said to her, I am struggling right now. And we need to be willing to be vulnerable and to share that so that people can support us as best as possible. So some of the responsibilities on us as well. So again, I just want to commend Angel for being transparent with this group. This has been so awesome. I could sit here and talk with you for a whole nother hour. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but I do want you to have the final remarks. I want you to address, is there something that I have not asked you about that you wish I had, that you feel like it's important to share with this audience?
I'm struck. It's such a great point that you made about trauma at the end, and for people of a majority culture that are listening, I think that awareness for so many Black and Brown people who see a video, it connects to, however many experiences that they've had of their own personal trauma, and just how that can hijack you, and how, the importance of giving yourself grace and seeking professional help and taking time to meditate. And that's where it feels substantively different. I can be sad. It doesn't connect to a trauma for me in the same kind of way as it does for so many people. So I think that's a great point. The podcast that I host, the Handle with Care podcast, you can find it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. The guests are incredibly generous with sharing stories of their own disruptive life events. That can be great for listening to. For people still on the call, it is very important to me to be expanding the stories that I tell. My network is a lot of white people, and that is representative of the guests I've had. Maybe you are listening and you think, I have a story that is important to share of how I was supported or not supported. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn. I'd love to connect also, because I think the importance of storytelling is huge. So thank you, Nika.
Thank you.
This is a good conversation.
Yeah, we're going to definitely include in our follow-up email information for people to connect with you, specifically with your Handle with Care podcast. And I will tell you that my network is relatively large, so I would be honored to connect you with some wonderful, people of color that I think can bring great perspective to your audience. And I'm just so grateful. I feel seen, valued, and heard that you accepted my invite. And I love the fact that you are willing to engage in this conversation, knowing that so many hearts are heavy. but it's necessary dialogue, and we have to keep each doing our part. So thank you so much, Liesel. Thanks to all of you who have joined. There are lots of great resources in that chat room, and so we're going to send you that transcript. And I look forward to seeing you all next week at the same time with our guest co-host, Kay Fabella. And I want to leave with just sharing the names again, as we started with the 3 individuals that have recently suffered the loss of their lives unjustly. And so Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you so much.